Good morning and welcome. We are continuing our daily video devotions to the book of 1 Samuel with 1 Samuel chapter 30. And if you read along with us yesterday, you'll know that after spending about a year with the Philistines because he was trying to avoid King Saul, the Philistine commanders, the commanders of their army, decided they no longer felt safe with David and some of David's men around. And if you'll remember, they no longer felt safe with David and some of his men around because the Philistine commanders had decided to attack the Israelites. And they feared that if they attacked the Israelites, David's loyalty would be tested and they might find themselves having to fight off David too because he would side with the Israelites. So here in chapter 31, we read about how David returns home. And when he returns home, he finds out that his village had been conquered and all the people, including his two wives, had been taken away. So chapter 30 is really a story about how David, along with some of his men, figure out where the people that had conquered his village had taken all of the survivors. And David and some of his men go and fight those people, and they are able to save all the people that had been taken from David's village, including David's two wives. And at the end of the chapter, there's a little bit of tension between David and his men, because not all of his men went with David the full way and helped free the captives from David's village. And see, they had captured, they'd not only gotten the people back, but they also had all of this plunder, all of this money and food and possessions, you name it, and they had captured it from this other people. And the men that had actually gone and fought in the battle felt like those that had stayed behind didn't deserve any of the plunder outside of being reunited with their family members that they had freed. They thought that because they didn't fight in the battle, they didn't deserve any of the battle's spoils. And I want to read for you a verse of how David replies to his those men that felt like the others didn't deserve any of the spoils, because in some ways I feel like those men did have a somewhat valid point, but I thought David's reply was quite interesting. And it's in verses 23 through 25. And it says, David replied, "No, my brothers, you must not do that with what the Lord has given us," meaning they must not hold back the spoils of their battle from those who didn't participate in the battle. "He," meaning God, "has protected us and delivered into our hands the raiding party that came against us. Who will listen to what you say? The share of the man who stayed with the supplies is to be the same as that of him who went down to the battle. All will share alike. David made this a statute and ordinance for Israel from that day to this." So essentially what King David said is no matter whether the men fought in the battle or whether they stayed behind and didn't fight in the battle, they would all share equally in the spoils of the battle. And see, I thought that was a really interesting thought, and David's thought behind it was because, no matter who fought in the battle or who stayed back, it was God who delivered their enemies into their hands. It was God who gave them that spoil, and no one had deserved that anymore because it was just the gift of God, right? And I think that's interesting for our life. God gives us many things. He gives us talents, abilities, resources, all different types of resources. And although we might feel like we have some possession over them because we work to earn those possessions, or we have these skills that we have to work to develop, I think we should recognize that everything, absolutely everything we've been given, is the gift of God, and it's not meant for solely us to enjoy, but for us to share it with others, and also to share with others why we are so generous with what God has given to us, so that maybe they might learn about God through how we decide to share of the resources God has given to us. So this Christmas season, I think this is a really apt time for this type of lesson. God has been so good and so faithful to us. And how do we share God's goodness with others so they might know of God's love for them as well? We'll see you on Friday as we wrap up 1 Samuel with 1 Samuel chapter 31.